Do you love to eat? It's a common response these days when asked the question, what do you love to do? To hear people say, I love to eat. I think it makes all our top 5 lists of things that we love to do. However, for those who have been following Jesus for a while, you know there comes a realization at times we must relinquish our pleasures to make space for God. In the realm of food, this surrender is practiced through fasting, a discipline that allows us to draw closer to God and rely on the Holy Spirit. But before going any further, I want to remind you that through these Easter devotions, we're discussing the various spiritual practices of following Jesus that he himself modeled for us. Therefore, I'd like to share with you a quote defining these sacred rhythms. Theology professor Dr. Robert Mulholland defines spiritual practices as acts of loving obedience by which we offer our brokenness and bondage to God for healing and liberation. I love this definition because that is exactly what following Jesus looks like. Without Jesus, we're broken and imperfect and bondage to our sinful nature. But with Jesus, through following him, our hearts are healed and we experience freedom. And though we're still imperfect, these spiritual practices that we engage in create time and space for us to access the presence and the power of the Holy Spirit, and in doing so be transformed from the inside out. However, arguably, no practice of Jesus is more alien or neglected in the modern Western church than that of fasting. The idea of going without eating, drawing on the Spirit's power through your stomach, can sound absurd. However, when we look at the Bible, Old Testament and New, we see all these stories where people sought God's guidance, his intervention, his power through fasting. We see Jesus model fasting, he gave instructions on it, and fasting was actively being practiced by the early church in the book of Acts. Consequently, for hundreds of years, fasting has been one of the core practices of Christianity. Fasting was and is a practice by which you deny your body, food, or anything really, in an attempt to starve the sinful nature side of us. In fasting, you're literally praying with your body, offering all that you are to God in worship. And as you yield your body to God, you're breaking the power of the flesh's control over you and opening up to the power of the Spirit in its place. You're learning to be joyful even when you don't get what you want, crave, rely on, or think you need. Is there any wonder that when Jesus went toe-to-toe with the devil, he was fasting? In fact, for 40 days, he fasted. And for much of my Christian walk, I interpreted this story in one way, that Satan waited until Jesus was exhausted, at his weakest, to make his move, trying to tempt Jesus away from his purpose and the Father's will. But this is a gross misunderstanding between the relationship of fasting and spiritual power. 40 days in, Jesus was at the height of his spiritual power and was able to wisely discern Satan's lies and dismiss his temptations with precision and skill. And such is the potential of fasting. When the devil tempted Jesus to turn stones into bread and to break his fast, Jesus answered in Matthew 4:4, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." This is what we're proclaiming when we fast, that we don't find our true sustenance, nourishment, or satisfaction in the physical things of this world. We find it in God alone. When thinking about this, I recall the Last Supper that Jesus had with his disciples before being betrayed, put on trial, and ultimately crucified. It was there that he created a new covenant with his followers, and he took bread, gave thanks, and broke it, saying, "This is my body given to you. Do this in remembrance of me." This, paired with the statement where Jesus says, "I'm the bread of life," we get this picture where just as bread satisfies hunger, Jesus, because of his death and resurrection, satisfies the deepest longings of the human heart and provides the ultimate fulfillment and sustenance for our souls. We all face war with our flesh and sinful nature. For now, it's inescapable, but it doesn't have to be this tug of war where both sides are equally matched, where no matter how hard you fight, you kind of remain in a stasis exhausted. But it's through practices like fasting where we starve our flesh, where we tap into our deeper spiritual strength, where we're able to think more clearly and follow the Spirit's leading, where we're worshiping mind, body, and soul to a God who wants to transform you from the inside out. Because of his broken body, he can heal our brokenness. Because of his resurrection, we can find freedom from the things that keep us in bondage. Fasting is an act of worship. Fasting is giving something up so that you can make room for God. And when we give something up, there becomes space. My challenge to you is during this Holy Week, one way or another, is to practice the spiritual practice of fasting. Whether it's traditionally with food for a short period of time, if medically appropriate, or that activity you overindulge in, that thing you think that you need, or that object you impulsively grab. By giving it up, you're making time and space for the Holy Spirit to speak to you. And wherever the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom.